Questions. Question 1. The Honorable Luk Chung-hung. President, the cumulative number of persons arrested since June this year in relation to the disturbances arising from the proposed legislative amendments is as high as several thousands, with some of them being one after another charged with the relevant offences. On the 4th of last month, when a case involving 5 defendants was brought before the Eastern Magistrates Court, a misnomer for one of the defendants and inconsistency in the Chinese and English versions of the charges were discovered in the consent to prosecute of the Department of Justice, or DOJ. As a result, the prosecution had to withdraw the charges against all the defendants. Later on, DOJ instituted prosecutions against them afresh. Regarding prosecution work of the DOJ, will the government inform this council, 1, of the number of cases in each of the past 5 years in which the trial processes were affected by errors made by prosecutors, the details of such errors, the number of cases in which the trials were discontinued, the number of defendants who were released by the court unconditionally, and the number of convicted persons who were imposed a more lenient punishment as a result of such errors. 2. Whether the DOJ has reviewed the causes of prosecutors making such errors so as to avoid the recurrence of such errors. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. Whether the officers concerned were subject to any disciplinary action. If so, of the details. If not, the reasons for that. And 3. Whether in order to cope with the increasingly heavy prosecution workload brought about by the handling of cases relating to the disturbances arising from proposed legislative amendments, whether the DOJ has examined the employment of additional manpower and measures for expediting prosecution work. If so, of the details. If not, the reasons for that. Secretary for Justice. President, the rule of law is the core value of Hong Kong. The criminal justice process includes investigation, prosecution, defense, adjudication, and punishment, of which prosecutors carry out their roles as an integral part of it. When conducting prosecutions, a prosecutor is required to comply with and promote the rule of law fairly and objectively, assisting the court to arrive at the truth and to do justice in accordance with the law. Professional, impartial, and independent prosecution work is pivotal in safeguarding the rule of law in Hong Kong. Article 63 of the Basic Law provides that the Department of Justice of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region shall control criminal prosecutions free from any interference. Prosecutors of the DOJ always shoulder the constitutional duty enshrined therein. The prosecution code compiled by the DOJ provides reference points and guidance for prosecutors in prosecution work. It states that the responsibility of prosecutors is to apply the highest professional standards in handling criminal cases. According to paragraph 1.2 of the code, a prosecutor must not be influenced by any investigatory, political, media, community, or individual interest or representation. In making decisions on whether or not to prosecute, the DOJ must make an objective and professional assessment of the evidence available and the applicable law and act in accordance with the code. Cases will not be handled differently because of the political beliefs or background of the persons involved. The Secretary for Justice, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the prosecution team have all along been discharging their prosecutorial duties fairly and without prejudice or favor, in accordance with the above principles, so as to safeguard criminal justice. In relation to the Honorable Luk Chung-hung's specific questions, the DOJ's detailed reply is as follows. 1. The DOJ does not maintain the requested figures. Generally, when conducting prosecutions, including handling prosecution documents, prosecutors of the DOJ are required to handle all criminal cases professionally and in strict accordance with the law and the relevant guidelines in the code. Regarding the handling of the case mentioned at the Eastern Magistrates Court on November 4th this year, the DOJ had made submissions to the court which were accepted by the court. as the 5 defendants concerned have been immediately arrested and charged, and the relevant legal proceedings are ongoing, it is not appropriate for the DOJ to comment further. 2. The Civil Service Performance Management System for civil servants, formulated by the Civil Service Bureau, serves to monitor and assess staff performance. Civil servants' performance is reflected in an honest, objective, and comprehensive manner in their appraisal reports. Where any act, conduct, or behavior of an officer is in breach of the Civil Service Code or government regulations, the department concerned will take appropriate follow-up actions in accordance with established procedures. If there is evidence upon investigation that a civil servant has misconducted himself, or a civil servant has been convicted of criminal offense by the court, appropriate disciplinary action will be taken, including imposing disciplinary punishment of verbal warning, written warning, reprimand, severe reprimand, reduction in rank, compulsory retirement and dismissal, etc. The above mechanism is applicable to civil servants of different grades and ranks, including prosecutors of the DOJ. The Code also sets out the role and duties of prosecutors. DOJ's prosecutors have always discharged their prosecutorial responsibilities in accordance with the relevant principles and have at all times exercised the highest standards of integrity and care in maintaining proper administration of justice. The DOJ attaches great importance to the professional qualities of prosecutors and provides them with continuing education and training. Moreover, the Prosecutions Division, or PD, of the DOJ has established procedures to regularly remind all prosecutors of points to note. It also reviews and updates from time to time the approaches and procedures in handling criminal cases for enhancement of prosecution work. 3. All criminal investigations are conducted by law enforcement agencies, which will, when necessary, refer cases to the DOJ for independent decisions on whether to prosecute. The DOJ at all times seeks to provide legal advice to law enforcement agencies, including the police, as expeditiously as possible. The processing time from commencement of investigation to institution of prosecution for each case depends on various factors, such as the time required for investigation by law enforcement agencies, the volume of evidence, and the nature and complexity of the case. There are currently over 200 prosecutors in the PD of the DOJ. There has been a dedicated team of prosecutors within the PD for handling cases concerning public order events to ensure consistency in the handling approach. In view of the recent increase in the number of public order event cases, the DOJ has arranged for officers who had formerly served in that dedicated team to assist in work relating to prosecutorial decisions subject to the overall operational needs of the PD. We do not rule out the possibility of introducing measures as necessary in the future, such as deployment of additional manpower to handle relevant cases. The DOJ will continue to maintain communication with the police and to conduct its prosecution work in a fair, effective, and efficient manner. Thank you, President. Mr. Luk Chung-hung. President, in commenting on such errors, I am disappointed by the S4J. She has no figures, no review, no penalty, no specific measures. You say the prosecutors can be retrained, but they have even made mistakes with names and charges, which should be both in English and Chinese. So, and also there is a long course list and waiting time, and also there is a low prosecution figure. You are not going to be able to restore order and end chaos and riots, so people can continue to issue fallacies to disrupt social order. Mr. Luk, please come to your order. Thank you for showing care for me. One of the examples, I care for all members. I don't only care for you. Please. come to your supplementary. Please allow me to continue. One of the examples is about the arrestees at Polytechnic University. About 200 people were brought to the court at the same time, and courts had to sit until midnight. Some of the prosecution papers were submitted to the court at 6 p.m. Does that mean you do not have enough prosecutors? How can you improve the situation and make sure that the prosecution process is fair? And you make sure that the prosecution will not be problematic because of errors and mistakes in the prosecution papers. I specifically would like to know how you can increase manpower. As for Jay, thank you for the supplementary. I think the member has made a few points. First, with regard to the November 4th case, when it was found that in the English preface to the consent to prosecute, and also when this was found to be in discrepancy with the name in the content of the paper, well, the DOJ has said that the Chinese name is correct, but then in order to correct the error in the English version, the DOJ requested for a short suspension and postponement of the case, which was allowed by the magistrate. When the court resumed, both sides made representations, and the prosecution side expressed that they would withdraw the prosecution, and at the court, it was said that the police would again arrest the people involved and start a new prosecution process. The member also mentioned a low prosecution rate. Well, that had to do with the time used for investigation and arrest, and also to make a decision on prosecution. As I said, after a person is arrested, we need to gather evidence and to decide whether the evidence is sufficient. And it also depends on the complexity of the case. All these can affect the time taken for making a decision to prosecute. And therefore, the investigation time can take long, and also legal advice also takes time to be formulated. Therefore, our prosecution rate is a result of the evidence sent to us, and we have been working efficiently. If someone feels that they break the law and they do not have to take responsibility for it, well, I would emphasize that that definitely is not the case. We are a society with the rule of law. Anyone who breaks the law has to take responsibility for it. Lastly, the member asked that in one case, many people were arrested and the courts had to sit till rather late. In order to handle that special situation, actually the law stipulates that the detention time of arrestee should be as short as possible and as practicable, that these people should be brought before a magistrate. And the DOJ, therefore, has attempted to prepare all the necessary documentation before the arrestees are taken to court. These are also submitted to the court and the defense. We had done an internal review of the arrangement. If in case a similar case should occur in future, we will consider taking more effective measures in order to make the judicial process more smooth. Thank you. Mr. Alvin Young. Which part of your supplementary has not been answered? I was asking her how she would propose to increase manpower. That was very specific. Secretary. Thank you, President. In terms of manpower, we have a dedicated team for prosecution work relating to public order events. At present, we have already deployed officers who had formerly served in that dedicated team to assist in work relating to prosecutorial decisions. And we do not rule out the possibility of introducing measures as necessary in the future, such as deployment of additional manpower in the PD to handle relevant cases. Of course, we have to consider the overall operational needs of the PD. And also, where appropriate, we can farm out cases to barristers and SC and lawyers in private practice. We do review our manpower from time to time. Thank you, Mr. Alvin Young. President, on the 20th of November, 242 people were arrested in the Polytechnic incident, and you had the court sitting in 6 courts, and the court started at 2 p.m., but then you submit the papers only at 9 p.m., and the courts only adjourned at 1 a.m., and it is very unsatisfactory. You said that you would do a review. What did you review? Was it because of the police? That is why the prosecution side did not prepare all the papers in time? Or is it that there was a problem with your department? So who is calling the shots, the police or your department? Please come clean on that. Secretary, thank you for the question. On the 20th of November, the number of people arrested and had to be brought before the magistrates was indeed of a big number. And that is why the police and the DOJ made arrangements in order to cooperate, in order to decide how many courts and how many people should be brought before a certain magistrate's court. The courts also gave us directions so we could make the arrangement. In other words, different parties had to communicate. We had learned a lesson from that incident, and if next time there are as many people, then we can decide how many should be sent to which magistrate court. We have already thought of better ways which are being perfected. We have already explored the issue. No, I asked her whether it was a problem with the DOJ, or was it because the police did not get the documentation in time? So where was the problem? Please sit down. Secretary, any supplement? I'd like to emphasize that it was a big number of people indeed, and therefore the DOJ, the police, and the courts all together made arrangements on the number of people to be brought before a certain magistrate's court so that we could expedite matters. We have to remember that the police are stipulated by law to bring the arrestees in the quickest practicable time. Therefore, the DOJ and the police have considered how we can do better if there is another occurrence, of heaven forbid, so that we know how we can complete or discharge our relevant responsibilities. Mr. Roy Kwong, President, the principal question talks about a misnomer in the prosecution papers, but that was not only that. As for J, only had 14.5 marks in the latest popularity ratings survey. You are the one with the lowest mark. And your overseas experts of IPCC just said that the IPCC did not have investigation powers, so they have decided to stand aside. Please come to your supplementary. No, I'm going to ask a very simple question. As for J, there are 2 rows in front of you. 1, to bow down, to bow out, and 2, to conduct independent inquiry. President, please ask the supplementary on my behalf. Mr. Roy Kwong's question is not within the purview of the principal question. Secretary, please choose to answer or not. President, I choose not to answer. Mr. Roy Kwong, President, I follow up. You cannot follow up. You have already asked your supplementary. Please sit down. I have already ruled that this supplementary is not within the scope of the principal question. Please sit down, Mr. Tet Hui. You have already asked your supplementary. Your supplementary has been ruled to have deviated from the principal question. Mr. Tet Hui, Mr. Roy Kwong, please sit down. If you don't, I will regard you to be displaying gross misconduct. Tet Hui, as for J, of course, you are not ashamed not to answer questions here. Here comes my supplementary. I can observe that very often DOJ does not do prosecution work according to the evidence, but according to political needs. as we can see, 242 people were arrested at the Polytechnic University. You immediately brought them before magistrates' courts for mention. There were papers which were lacking. Some people had not had a statement taken, so there would not be a reasonable opportunity for conviction. The courts actually said that it was totally unsatisfactory and you wasted the time of the court and the lawyers, and the prosecution had to apologize there and then. My supplementary is, this goes to show that there is arbitrary arrest and arbitrary prosecution. This is very serious. I would warn you to stop doing this right away. My supplementary is, will you direct your DOJ and prosecutors to stop arbitrary arrest and arbitrary prosecution? As for J, first of all, President, I have to strongly object to the accusations against the work of the DOJ. We definitely only relied on evidence and not political considerations in making prosecutorial decisions. When we make a decision on whether to prosecute, we have to look at the evidence available and the applicable law in order to do objective and independent analysis and act according to the prosecution code. We'll definitely not differ in our handling of cases because of the political beliefs or background of the persons involved. Therefore, whenever we make any decisions to prosecute, we definitely will not give consideration to political beliefs or background of the people. The stances of the people involved have nothing to do whatsoever with our decision to prosecute. When we consider the evidence, if there is sufficient evidence which will be admitted by the court so that there is a reasonable opportunity for conviction, then the DOJ will prosecute cases. Thank you, President. Can I add? Which part of your supplementary has not been answered? In fact, in many cases, the arrestees had not even seen a lawyer and a statement had not been taken. Does that mean that there is arbitrary arrest and arbitrary prosecution? Secretary, do you want to supplement? Well, I have nothing to supplement, but I'd like to emphasize that definitely there is no arbitrary prosecution. Cases may take long or short time, and you cannot just give a broad brush comment.
Question number 2. Ms. Starry Lee. President, the disturbances arising from the opposition to the proposed legislative amendments have persisted for half a year, during which the radicals have incessantly brought rows, vandalized facilities, and attacked police officers and members of the public, and some people even die. The targets and scope of the attacks are continually expanding, and the weapons they are using are increasingly lethal. There are comments that, apart from dealing a heavy blow to the economy and international reputation of Hong Kong, the chaotic situation has also resulted in members of the public being tormented by the turmoil and social dissension. Members of the public are deprived of freedom of speech and a normal life as they silence themselves to avoid attacks and dare not go out because of personal safety concern. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it will set up a coordinating committee on stopping violence and curbing disorder to be chaired by the chief executive, with members comprising the relevant secretaries of departments, directors of bureaus, and heads of departments to make pragmatic and objective assessment and judgment on a daily basis on the latest situation on the street, the damages to public facilities, traffic conditions, etc., and to instruct the relevant government departments to take preventive and contingency measures to curb violence so as to safeguard the safety, dignity, and human rights of members of the public, and ensure the smooth operation of public transport, 2. As there are comments that the result of the District Council ordinary election held last month have reflected the distrust of many members of the public in the government and their dissatisfaction with its performance in policy implementation, whether the government has conducted a review in this regard, if so, of the outcome and improvement measures, and in order to rebuild the trust of members of the public in the government, how the government will tackle as early as possible the torrent of unsubstantiated information on the internet lists, the social atmosphere is agitated. And 3, whether the chief executive will, before setting up an independent review committee, first alleviate the dissension within society properly and eliminate the confrontational and hostile sentiments between the police and the public. If so, of the measures in place. If not, the reasons for that. Chief Secretary for Administration. President, our reply to Ms. Starry Lee's question is as follows. 1. To tackle the spate of illegal activities during the civil arrest since June this year, the CEE has been leading the government of Hong Kong SAR to handle the issues and ensure the normal functioning of society. At the meeting held every weekday morning, CE, together with all principal officials, POs, review and discuss the latest situation and response to that. In addition, CE will hold meetings with the concerned POs to plan and deliberate on tactics in the light of the latest development. On the days of large-scale public order events, POEs, usually on Sundays, CE would chair meetings with POs to monitor and respond to the situation. Further, in early October, CE formed a high-level inter-bureau task force within the government. The purpose is to coordinate and follow up on the series of issues arising from the recent social unrest. In terms of actual operation, the government will, in accordance with established practice, activate the Emergency Monitoring and Support Center, EMSC, in a timely manner as appropriate. Apart from monitoring the situation during POEs in different districts, EMSC will also communicate and coordinate with relevant departments and assist the government to coordinate emergency response as required. EMSC will make timely reports to the key officials to keep them up to date. To effectively cope with and expeditiously respond to POEs involving escalated violence, I, as Chief Secretary for Administration, chair a high-level interdepartmental action task force, IATF. The function of IATF is to oversee and coordinate the various actions that bureaus and departments need to take expeditiously and effectively to respond to and follow up on the situation, as well as to disseminate information and dispel rumors. The objective is to support the police in stopping violence and curbing disorder. The work of IATF includes expeditious removal of street blockages and speedy repairs to damage done to public facilities so that members of the public can resume their daily routine as quickly as possible. In addition, IATF has followed up on major incidents such as the closure of the Cross Harbour Tunnel owing to serious damage caused by violent protesters. Under the coordination of IATF and with close collaboration of the relevant departments, including the Transport Department, Highways Department, Electrical and Mechanical Services Department, Architectural Services Department, Fire Services Department, Food and Environmental Hygiene Department, and the police, we completed the repair work quickly and reopened CHT within a short period of time. Before and immediately after the reopening of CHT, the government arranged special ferry service to cater for the commuting needs of the local residents. We're keenly aware that in order to cope with the serious situation that Hong Kong is currently facing, all bureaus and departments must work together as a team and in unity. At a meeting with the heads of department, CE clearly required all bureaus and departments to spare no effort in stopping violence and curbing disorder. For high-level coordination will continue to strengthen collaboration amongst the departments and closely monitor and react swiftly to the development of the protest action with a view to ensuring that the community can be business as usual as soon as possible. 2. The 2019 District Council Ordinary Election, the election was held smoothly on the 24th of November. The cumulative turnout rate of about 71.2% is a record high. This shows that voters hope to express their views through the election. In general, the poll was held in a peaceful, safe and orderly manner, representing a wish of the public for the community to return to a peaceful and safe one. The government respects the election results. We have noticed that there are various analyses and interpretations in the community in relation to the results. Quite a few are of the view that the results reflect people's dissatisfaction with the current situation and the deep-seated problem in society. We will listen to the opinions of members of the public humbly and seriously reflect. Regarding online messages, the Information Services Department and bureaus and departments have been closely monitoring the situation. When it is spotted that unverified information circulating widely online is stirring up negative sentiment in the community, the government will make clarifications via multiple channels as soon as possible to allay concerns. ISD has set up a dedicated web page and launched a series of one-minuter on the social media platform to disseminate government clarification and important messages. At the same time, ISD has launched a set of TV and radio APIs theme-check facts to keep fake news in check, to remind the general public to beware of various information that they come across. 3. Members of the public enjoy the freedom of expression, speech, and assembly. In accordance with the law, that the police have a statutory duty to maintain public safety and public order. When unlawful acts take place, the police must take appropriate action to respond. If there is no unlawful act, the police do not need to take any enforcement action at all. We understand that recent violent protests have caused tension between the police and the public. However, to maintain rule of law and public order in an effective manner in Hong Kong, efforts of the police alone are not enough. Support and cooperation of the public are also required. Only with mutual understanding of each other can we restore order in society and ensure Hong Kong continues to be a safe city. CE and the political team will continue to engage in in-depth dialogue with people of different political stances and background in the community so as to get a better understanding of deep-seated problem society and find pragmatic solutions. In addition, we have announced that we would invite community leaders, experts, and academics to set up an independent review committee to examine and review the deep-seated social problems. We hope that through looking into the causes of the social events that took place in the past months, the committee will come up with solutions for the government. We'll listen to the views of the community before we decide on the timing to set up the committee. Ms. Starry Lee. Well, the government has this criticized as incompetent, and then the departments do not work in collaboration. The response the government has provided is very weak. People have expected that the government will come up with new tactics and response after the DC election. And last week we witnessed people setting fire to the High Court and the Court of Final Appeal. The government did was just to condemn the violent radicals, and the police have recently uncovered lethal weapons, including bombs and guns. Some have reached the stage of terrorism, and people would not like to see every week that there will be violent protests and violent destruction and damage caused to the community. How would the government do to respond to this very serious aspiration of our community? Chief Secretary for Administration, I think the first thing to do is to stop the violence and curb disorder. If a protest is an authorized public event, the police will certainly do its best to keep things under control. And if there's anyone breaks the law, enforcement will be taken. We will not tolerate unlawful acts. We understand the community's dissatisfaction from the CE and other principal officials. We are alive to such public opinion, and we would find ways to deal with the deep-seated problems in society. So we hope the review that we have promised can start very soon, so that we can seriously deal with the deep-seated problems in the community, and also to look at the root cause of the civil unrest and other related issues. Ms. Alice Mack. Well, this reply from the CS for Aid is both ludicrous and laughable. In the first part, we are told that there's an interdepartmental action task force which is tasked to deal with the destruction and the damage done to facilities and the blockages removed. Does the CS for A know how many traffic lights have been damaged? And there are people, we have cases where people are killed because of the traffic lights going out. Just look at Mong Kok. You know that motorists and pedestrians have to do some self-regulation to avoid accidents. Oh well, you talk about the Cross Harbour Tunnel. What about Tolo Highway? It was closed to traffic for days. Well, you only provide the ferry service after the the Dolo Highway traffic has been restored, and then you provide just a few more days after CHT is back to business. So do you expect us to thank you for that? Is that you should work in together in collaboration, and CE has asked the departments to do all they can to stop the violence and curb the disorder? Why do you have to make this request? Is it because some departments have failed to do that? And has any department failed to heed this instruction? Have some departments been doing their own business without complying with this instruction? And even some directors of bureaus and secretaries are not doing, the department of heads are not doing this. In that they do not chip in. What would the government do about them? CSWA, I have to clarify a point about traffic lights. EMSD in particular have been doing its best, and the colleagues there have been doing their best to repair the damaged traffic lights. But very often the traffic lights cannot resume normal operation because the control panel was damaged, and also gradually we were running out of spare parts. Therefore, we have been issuing warnings to rioters that they should not do this to traffic lights because it would seriously affect the safety of the elderly and the disabled. And we would certainly pursue the matter very seriously against the rioters. Very often the repair work had to be done overnight. In the past, the MTRC was able to resume normal operation after a short period of repair, but gradually it's getting more and more difficult. But so we would certainly deploy more people to repair traffic lights of road junctions as soon as we can. We know that the departments and bureaus are facing the challenge together. We have to work in unison. Apart from the inter-bureau, the task force, the IATF that I talked about is about doing the actual work. We spent 100 hours. 800 colleagues were involved to restore the CHT to the normal operation. I have to thank all my colleagues for the hard work. My questions are not answered at all because it said in the last part of the reply that the CE asks all government bureaus and departments to spare no effort in stopping violence and curbing disorder. What if they don't do it? What are you going to do if the departments and bureaus fail to follow this order? Let's say C&E department, the Correctional Services Department, and Immigration Department have all chipped in. Some of their officers have been appointed special police constable to help the police. And some departments have let the police use their vehicles to support their operations. And also in removing road blockages, once the site is ready for clearance, the Highways Department and Transport Department colleagues would enter the scene and do what they are required to do to restore safety and order to the community. What's the problem? Am I not being clear in my question? I asked what you would do for departments who have failed to follow the instruction. Well, if you want to follow up the matter, you may wish to consider another forum. If you speak too much, you talk about too many issues in your questions, then you may not be able to get a focused reply. I think the Chief Secretary has already talked about traffic lights. Ms. Tanya Chan, I'll keep your advice in mind when I ask my questions. I wanted to ask a question about part 3 of the reply. I think the Chief Secretary knows this. The international expert panels of the IPCC has all the members resigned, and now you still talk about setting up a review committee. When are you going to face up to the reality here and set up a commission of inquiry to investigate into this particular civil arrest, especially into issues of police brutality? On the 8th of November, one member of the IEP already put out a statement that the IPCC lacked the capacity to ask witnesses to testify, and there's no investigation power. Well, again, this is not related to the May question and reply, but CS Way. Okay. I think our position about the mechanism is clear. We are of the view that the IPCC is a statutory mechanism. It's a proper platform to throw up the relevant issues. And now we have proposed another mechanism, which is an independent review committee. It's a separate issue, but the purpose is to find out the deep-rooted causes and also to find solutions. But then I would say that both would work to support each other. Mr. Junius Ho, in answering Ms. Starry Lee's question in part 1, you talk about the setting up or activation of the Emergency Monitoring and Support Center. If the center has been effective, we have already stopped the violence and put a stop to the disorder. We need to find a clear roadmap to find a way out. The prohibition of face covering regulation is facing judicial challenge, and even the request to extend to suspend the ruling of the judicial review has been denied by the Court of Appeal. Well, to stop the violence and curb the disorder, it would require inter-bureau and interdepartmental collaboration. You have to find effective tactics which will involve the judiciary in the proposed coordinating committee on stopping violence and curbing disorder. You are the head of our civil servants. I'm very disappointed at the reply you gave when you were asked whether rioters came out to vandalize the Cross Harbor Tunnel. What would you do? You said there was nothing you could do. You should take real action. Can you set up an interdepartmental coordinating committee involving also the judiciary to do some real thing for Hong Kong people? Well, actually, it's clearly stated in the May reply that the CE has led a high-level inter-bureau task force to work on the relevant issues. So it's nothing like a vacuum as alleged. We have come up with responses. And the Emergency Monitoring and Support Center is a standing arrangement. It will be activated when there's something emergent, something of an emergency nature. so that the principal officials would be keep up to date. We work in accordance with the law, and we would enforce the law resolutely. And the member talked about my response to a question about the Cross Harbour Tunnel, but it was taken out of context. I said, after what we have done in response, if the rioters still deliberately damage and vandalize public facilities, then there's nothing we can prevent that. But we will take action of preventive action, such as putting some nets on top of the footbridge so that people cannot throw objects down to the carriageway. But it's difficult to control such unlawful and violent acts, but we will not connive at law breaking.
Question 3. The Honourable Chan Kin-por. Thank you, President. It has been reported that the laboratories of the Chinese University of Hong Kong and 2 other universities were intruded into one after the other by radical demonstrations last month, and some dangerous chemicals therein were stolen. The poisonous and dangerous chemicals stolen from CUHK include 17.5 liters of concentrated sulfuric acid, 2.5 liters of hexane, as well as 80 hectares of concentrated nitric acid that may be used for making 10,000 exit bombs. If radical demonstrators use weapons made from such chemicals and demonstrations, the lives and safety of police officers and members of the public will be seriously threatened. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it knows the total quantities of chemicals stolen from various universities since June this year and the quantities of lethal weapons that may be made from such chemicals? 2, why CUHK's laboratories were allowed to store such large quantities of dangerous chemicals? Of the legislation currently in place to regulate the storage of dangerous chemicals in various university laboratories, whether the government will require the various universities to strengthen the security measures at the laboratories so as to prevent dangerous chemicals from being stolen again. And 3, in the light of potential threats posed by demonstrators' possible use of highly lethal chemical weapons, how the government safeguards the safety of frontline police officers and members of the public. Secretary for Education. President, recently some universities were vandalized and even occupied by protesters. They made and used weapons on campus, causing devastation there, and many people were injured. The universities are assessing the damage done to the campuses, while some have started restoration works. Some chemicals stored on campus for teaching and research purposes have been stolen. They include some toxic, corrosive, and inflammable chemicals. If unscrupulous elements use them to make weapons, the lives and property of members of the public will be seriously endangered with dire consequences. These were serious cases that pose grave threats to public safety. The universities have reported to the police for follow-up action and investigation. A reply to the Honourable Chan Kin-por's question is as follows. 1. The Education Bureau has been liaisoned with the university in respect of on-campus incidents in recent months. EDB is aware of the theft of chemicals in some universities, and they have reported the matter to the police for action. It is understood that the dangerous chemicals stolen from 3 universities, i.e. City University of Hong Kong, CUHK, and Hong Kong Polytechnic University, include toxic, corrosive, and inflammable items such as concentrated nitric acid, concentrated sulfuric acid. If these chemical substances are mixed with other liquids or mishandled, combustion and explosion may result. Moreover, the improper use and storage of these substances can cause danger to oneself and others. As universities are still stock-taking, the relevant quantities stolen cannot be provided for the time being. The police are working hard to recover the missing items, and so far no one has been arrested. According to the Dangerous Goods Ordinance, Cap 295, it is an offense for a person to store, convey, or use dangerous goods exceeding an exempt quantity without a valid license. Besides, there have been cases in which people learned to make dangerous items from methods circulated online. The police remind the public that manufacturing or conspiring to manufacture explosives is an extremely serious offense. Under Section 54 of the Crimes Ordinance, Cap 200, the maximum penalty upon conviction is 20 years of imprisonment. The police are confident and capable of investigating such crime and urge members of the public to refrain from engaging in illegal activities. 2. The storage of dangerous goods is regulated under the DGO, while the classification and exempt quantities of different categories of dangerous goods under DGO are stipulated in the Dangerous Goods Application and Exemption Ordinance, Cap 295A, and the Dangerous Goods General Regulations, Cap 295B, respectively. A license issued by the Fire Services Department under the DGO is required for storage of dangerous goods exceeding exempt quantities. Upon receipt of an application for a dangerous goods license, FSD will conduct a risk assessment based on the actual circumstances of the case and formulate corresponding fire safety requirements. A license will be issued to an applicant only after an inspection has been conducted to confirm full compliance with the fire safety requirements. FSD will also conduct inspections proactively from time to time should there be any violation of the fire safety requirements or conditions of license. FSD will take relevant enforcement actions in accordance with the DGO. EDB has learned from the relevant institutions that there are laboratories in some faculties, such as faculties of science, engineering, and medicine of UGC-funded universities, that different chemicals are required for teaching and research purposes. If the chemicals in the laboratories fall within the definition of dangerous goods under the DGO, the universities have established a monitoring mechanism to ensure that the storage and use of such on campus meet the requirements of the relevant ordinance. Laboratory management staff will procure and store them as required for teaching and research purpose and strictly observe the DGO and other relevant fire safety regulations. Subsequent to the incidents of theft of chemicals in universities, all of them have taken prompt action to enhance on-campus security by hiring more security staff, increase security patrols, adopting identity verification and registration procedures at entrances or exits, and strengthening the security measures for dangerous goods stores. All students and staff have been informed of the relevant requirements and arrangements. In view of the recent social situation and to further safeguard public safety, FSC has proactively contacted tertiary institutions to review the situation of the storage of dangerous goods on campus and reminded them to step up security measures and to report to the police immediately if any dangerous goods or chemicals were found missing. EDB will also provide universities with appropriate assistance in enhancing their security measures as required. 3. The mission of FSD is to protect the lives and property of the public from fire or other calamities. In handling incidents involving dangerous goods and chemicals, fire officers will carry out firefighting and rescue operations in accordance with the relevant guidelines. In case unknown chemicals are found during an operation, FSD will perform a risk assessment and take appropriate actions immediately. If necessary, FSD will contact the government laboratory and seek their professional advice on proper handling of chemicals to protect public safety. The police attach great importance to the safety of police officers while executing their duties and have been proactively taking measures to review the protective gear from time to time. The police will also procure or replace suitable equipment as appropriate so as to meet the actual operational needs and enhance the safety of officers. If members of the public find any dangerous goods, they should seek help from the police as soon as possible. To avoid injury, they should keep an appropriate distance and refrain from getting near or touching such items. Thank you. Mr. Chan Kin-por. I have a follow-up question for the Secretary. What about schools other than universities? They also have laboratories. How can you control the storage of dangerous goods, and what about inspections? I don't know whether there is someone from the FSC, and how do you fix the exempt quantities? How do you patrol these universities? Secretary, indeed, in secondary schools, chemicals are used for teaching purpose. For instance, in school laboratories, there are some chemicals stored for teaching purpose. EDB has guidelines for schools to follow on how to monitor chemicals stored in secondary schools and the use of such and record-keeping matters. In secondary schools, we have an established list. In our list of furniture and equipment, we have listed out the types and quantities of chemicals that can be kept by schools. And in the manual for safety of laboratories, we have also got a list of such chemicals. The quantities of such chemicals would usually be lower than the exempt quantities in the regulation. Take nitric acid as an example. The exempted quantities is 10 liters. In our list of equipment and furniture, in chemical laboratories, 2.5 liters, and science laboratories also 2.5 liters as the limit. So chemicals stored by schools would be lower than the exempt quantities. And students cannot access storeroom of such chemicals, so the storerooms are properly locked. Only technicians and assistants and teachers of laboratories can enter the storeroom, and they will take out the right amount of chemicals and put in the laboratories for use by students. So we have safety guidelines. Mr. Hon LUK Chung. Now for chemicals, so long as the safety measures are taken, I'm sure universities can take good care. My worry is universities have been subject to unreasonable allegations, and they've been smeared. Some alleged universities to be factories of weapons, and some pro-establishment members deliberately take out funding applications involving schools or universities in order to punish them. The universities will resume their class very soon. How can you ensure that the operation can be restored to normal? Secretary. Now, universities have autonomy, have an academic autonomy, and this is a well-recognized value in society. And the University Grant Committee has its established policy when in their dealing with universities. Academic autonomy is granted to universities for academic purpose because many public are involved in our universities. And universities are funded by public resources, and therefore they have to be accountable to the public. Mr. Au mentioned that in the past, many members of the public have raised comments about management of universities. I think universities have to take note of them and reflect on their operation to live up to the expectations of the public. Indeed, in the past, we have seen some undesirable situations in universities. Some may be because of the universities themselves, and some may be beyond their control. However, the public have expectations for universities. They should improve their management so that they can address the general expectations of the community. The EDB will continue to ensure that universities have administrative and academic autonomy. Through UGC and our funding policy, will ensure that this is being implemented. Ms. Alice Mack. Any supplement? No, I'd like to make my question clearer. You can only point out which part of your question hasn't been answered. And if you want to ask a new question, you can join the queue again. I talked about smearing of universities. Can you advise pro-establishment members not to make life difficult for universities? That was not your previous question, Ms. Alice Mack. In the first part of the Secretary's question or reply, it is said that the universities are still taking stock of their chemicals, and therefore the relevant quantities of stolen chemicals will not be provided at the time being. For the time being, the police are working hard to locate the missing items. Since you are still stock taking, what is there for the police to recover? And then in part 2, it is said that you have a mechanism to ensure that the use and storage of dangerous goods in universities comply with the relevant legislation, and that universities will adhere strictly to the DGO and also fire safety requirements. Now, if they have complied with all the requirements, how difficult it is for them to stock take. For sure, universities should know the amount of chemicals stored and missing. How come we can't be given any information yet? So Secretary Yu said that you have to ensure that there is autonomy for universities. That means there's something wrong with their autonomy. First, they failed to store their chemicals safely. They have problem with security, and as said today, they have yet to confirm the amount of dangerous goods missing. Secretary, I understand that the public have expectations for the management of universities. Regarding chemicals stored by universities, they have an inventory, and also records on amounts they are storing. But then some school campuses were occupied for a while, and they stormed into storerooms, and some chemicals were taken away. In tidying up the school campuses, we found some chemicals as well. For instance, in Mr. Chan's question, he mentioned that CUHK found some of the chemicals missing, and yet the university indeed recovered some of them on the campus. So the fact is, universities are still tidying up the school campuses, and they have yet to patrol all the rooms and venues. So they cannot confirm the actual quantities of chemicals missing, but we will maintain very close contact with universities. Mr. Tony C., thank you. Of course, chemicals can be used for making lethal bombs. And of course, they should not be used for making weapons. Now, I'd like to ask whether you will conduct some publicity campaign on the TV or elsewhere to educate the public how to identify fake and genuine bombs for their own safety, and can you publicize the penalty for making such bombs so that they can be deterred from so doing? Secretary, indeed. Recently, we have seen fake or genuine explosives in the community recently. And if members of the public have discovered possibly explosives or dangerous items, they should report to the police at once. They should not try to confirm whether it is fake or not, because it is dangerous. The best approach is, if you spot any suspicious items, you should report to the police at once. You should stay away from such items and leave it for the police to handle. That is the safest advice for members of the public. As regards the manufacturing of bombs or explosives, it is a very serious offense under Section 55 of the Crimes Ordinance, Cap 200. The maximum penalty upon conviction is 20 years of imprisonment. If need be, we can conduct more publicity. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind the whole community that such offenses can come with serious penalty, and it will disrupt law and order, and it may seriously endanger the lives of members of the public, and even yourself can be seriously harmed when you are preparing such items. Mr. Chan Kin-por, many teachers and students have been arrested in the recent incidents, and we're worried that the education sector has many people supporting such violence, and we don't know how bad the situation will become. You talked about 10 liters of sulfuric acid, and in fact only 2.5 liters can only be stored in schools. Now, the situation may get worse. Will you consider further lowering the exempt threshold, or beyond a certain level, there must be a report to the Education Bureau? Or will you also step up patrol? Well, 10 liters is the exempt quantity under the law. In principle, if you store more than 10 liters, you need to apply for a license from the FSD. Regarding our list of furniture and equipment, the maximum level is only 2.5 liters. So we allow schools to procure no more than 2.5 liters of such chemicals. Yes, as suggested by Mr. Chen, we can discuss with schools again to see whether the limit can be further lowered to suit their operational needs, because that would be safer for both the school and the community. Yes, we're going to do that. Mr. Hon LUK Chung, I just want to make one more supplement. Since senior management of universities have made a lot of efforts to ensure safety on campus, why should we continue to condemn them? I urge the community, the pro-establishment camp in particular, not to make life difficult for the universities. This is not in the main question, but the secretary can choose to reply or not. We should not pinpoint a particular group of people making life difficult for the universities. This is a free society, and we are free to express our views on any matters. The whole government team, the whole accountable officers team have been doing our utmost to tackle the incident, but we've been frequently reprimanded by the opposition camp. So may I appeal to Mr. Ao not to condemn the government team unreasonably.
Question for Hon Jimmy NG. On 4th of the last month, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership RCEP Leaders Summit released a joint statement announcing that the 15 REP participating countries, India not included, has concluded all text-based negotiations and essentially all their market access issues negotiations, and have been committed to ensuring the RCEP agreement to be signed next year. The government indicated that in April this year it will seek Hong Kong's accession into RCEP after the negotiations have been completed. On the other hand, quite a number of Hong Kong businessmen hoped that the government would step up assistance to them in relocating their production bases in order to cope with the Sino-US trade conflict. In this connection, will the government inform this council, 1, of the latest progress of the work on seeking Hong Kong's accession to RCEP and promoting external economic and trade cooperation? And 2, whether the government will expedite the expansion of the networks of the overseas Hong Kong economic and trade offices, particularly those in ASEAN countries and the US, so as to strengthen the support for the Hong Kong business in overseas countries. 3, as the mainland authorities are progressively setting up overseas economic and trade cooperation zones (ETZZs) in the Belt and Road countries, of the measures put in place by the government in support Hong Kong businessmen in relocating their production bases to ETZZs. Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. In order to assist Hong Kong businesses and investors in expanding markets and further consolidating Hong Kong's role as an international trade and investment hub, the government has been proactively expanding external trade and economic cooperation, signing free trade agreements (FTA) and investment promotion and protection agreements (IPPA) with various economies. We have actively participated in regional cooperation with a view to further establishing Hong Kong's global trade network, assisting Hong Kong's businesses in overseas investment and expansion. My reply to 3 parts of the question is as follows. 1. On November 4, 15 members economies of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership (RCEP), namely the 10 member states of the ASEAN, Australia, China, Japan, Korea, and New Zealand, have announced the conclusion of tax-based negotiations, and the agreement is expected to be signed in 2020. RCEP will be the most comprehensive FTA in the Pan-Asian region. Against the headwind of protectionism, the breakthrough in RCEP negotiation will bring positive effects to promoting free and open trade and further regional cooperation. Hong Kong has been a staunch supporter of regional cooperation, and our joining RCEP is a big step in our efforts. To this end, the government in last year expressed to members' economies our wish to join the RCEP, and we received positive feedback. In November this year, when the members' economies concluded the tax-based negotiation, the government have issued letters to the members' economies, reiterating wish to join RCEP. We will continue working towards the goal of seeking Hong Kong accession to RCEP as the first new member economy. For the progress in expanding our FTA network, Hong Kong have signed 8 FTAs with 20 countries. The latest one was signed with Australia in this March, which is the 4th FTA signed by the current term government. Is for the FTA signed in 2017 between Hong Kong and ASEAN has gradually come into force this June. Hong Kong and Thailand have also signed a memorandum of understanding on strengthening economic relations recently on 29th of November. On bilateral trade operations, both sides agreed to broaden and deepen the commitments to trade and investment liberalization. Exploratory talks on negotiating on Hong Kong-Thailand FTA will commence with a view to establishing a work plan for negotiations by 2021. The two sides will also review and upgrade the IPPA signed in 2005. Apart from this, we are also seeking to forge an FTA with the Pacific Alliance, which includes Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, exploring with the UK options for forging even closer economic ties, including the possibility of having an FTA after Brexit. Apart from FTAs, Hong Kong have also signed 21 IPPAs with 30 member economies so far, including the latest one with the United Arab Emirates (UAE) signed in this June. Currently, we are also negotiating IPPAs with Russia and Turkey respectively. Furthermore, we're actively promoting Hong Kong as a two-way global investment and business hub by organizing large-scale events overseas. For example, the Hong Kong Trade Development Council (HKTDC) organized the Think Asia, Think Hong Kong event in LA, the US September this year, to promote Hong Kong advantages. The event attracted over 1,500 participants, and about 440 business matching meetings were arranged. HKTDC will stage the In-Style Hong Kong event in Manila, the Philippines, next year to promote Hong Kong's product and services. HKTDC will also help Hong Kong business establish a connection and sales network, as well as find investment partners through organizing business missions and increasing presence in online marketplaces. 2. The government has been actively expanding the network of Overseas and Economic Trade Office (ETO) with a view to strengthening Hong Kong external trade connections and interactions. Currently, there are 13 overseas ETOs, including Washington, San Francisco, New York ETOs in the US, and Jakarta, Singapore, Bangkok ETOs in ASEAN. The present ETO network in the US comprehensively covers all the states in the US, with the San Francisco and New York ETOs overseeing the western and eastern parts of the US respectively, while the Washington ETO is responsible for the liaison work with the political circle to the U.S. As for ASEAN, in the face of increasing business presence in Hong Kong ASEAN and the great potential of the region, the government has newly established 2 ETOs in ASEAN countries, namely the Jakarta ETO established in 2016 and the Bangkok ETO established in February this year. The presence of these 3 ETOs in ASEAN will robustly strengthen our trade and economic ties with ASEAN countries. In order to consolidate Hong Kong's presence among its trading partners and explore new business opportunities, the government will continue establishing ETOs overseas. We are currently engaged in the preparatory work for opening the Dubai ETO, which is expected to commence operation early next year. The ETO will become the second ETO set up by the current term government and the first in the Middle East region, which will further expand our representative network in the region and raise Hong Kong international visibility. It would also bring immense business opportunities as well. Our government will continue expanding the visibility of establishing ETOs in different countries with a view to further strengthening Hong Kong trade network. The 13 existing ETOs will keep up with the promotional work overseas to strengthen Hong Kong external relations. The ETOs will maintain close and regular contacts with local business sectors and introduce them to the latest position and advantages of Hong Kong to encourage them to set up business or invest in Hong Kong, bring together stronger overseas support to Hong Kong businesses. The third part. The HAR government attached great importance to the pursuit of the Belt and Road Initiative. As the Chief Executive said in the policy address this October, the government will capitalize on the opportunities brought by the initiative to open up more markets for Hong Kong enterprises and professional services, including supporting Hong Kong enterprises in setting up businesses in the mainland's Overseas Economic and Trade Cooperation Zone (ETZs). In this regard, the government will take forward the following areas of work, including 1A. Strengthening promotional efforts, missions, exchange sessions, and thematic forums to organize and deepen enterprise understanding of the ETZs. B. To provide one-stop support for Hong Kong enterprises, HKTDC will set up a BNR ETZZ support service desk to provide Hong Kong enterprises with information related to ETZs, including local trade and investment policies, business environment, and development situation in various industries, etc. C. Deliberate policy measures at government level. The CEDB exploring incentives and facilitation measures with the Ministry of Commerce, including actively encouraging ETZs to provide support for Hong Kong enterprises to establish a presence there, collating and disseminating to enterprise information on matters related to the mainland bonded goods, such as measures on no levy and no return of tax, and promoting further Can the Undersecretary please speed up your reply? On the further collaboration between HKTDC and mainland business on industrial organizations providing back-end sales support for those Hong Kong enterprises operating in ETZs, therefore assisting developing the mainland market. In addition, in the above-mentioned MOU entered by the SAR and Thailand, the latter will explore the possibility of extending the relevant facility measures for Hong Kong companies investing in Thailand, including tax incentives, non-tax facilitation, update user information on investment opportunity, market intelligence, and hand-on support. B. To promote matching with the selected ETZs, CEDB, and the Ministry of Commerce to trial on a pilot basis the matching of 2 or 3 Hong industry interests developing business there with 2 or 3 selected zone particulars in ASEAN. In-depth analysis of local market situation and industry needs to conduct review, facilitate industry matching. The government continues to deepen external trade and broaden trade overseas and help Hong Kong business to expand the global market. Mr. Jimmy, I would like to thank the Bureau for providing a lot of macroscopic and conceptual assistance to Hong Kong business. May I ask the Bureau, do we have more concrete and pragmatic steps to helping the Hong Kong businessmen in the backdrop of signing U.S. trade disputes to relocate their production base from the mainland to the Belt and Road countries? Will the government set up a fund or a support loan to help the Hong Kong businesses to relocate their production bases from the mainland to the BNR countries? Well, you know that it costs a lot of money to relocate a production base. Undersecretary, thank you for the supplementary question. We noticed that in the past few years, and the mainland have set up a lot of the ETCCs in a lot of Belt and Road countries, a lot for and including the ASEAN. Well, we can establish a presence into ETCCs. They will be able to capitalize on the BNR opportunities, and what could be a nice entry point. As for how to help the Hong Kong business to set up shop into zones, there are quite a few ways going about it. And last month, on 21st of November, the CEDB and the Ministry of Commerce and the Mainland and Hong Kong Belt and Road Task Group have discussed how to help the Hong Kong companies to stay set up shop in those zones. Well, I'll provide some inkling and a main reply. First, with development understanding, for example, through trade missions and thematic forums, and whilst the Belt and Road Forum. On those platforms, we will provide thematic forums on the ETCCs, and in those thematic forums, we will explain policy, the concessions, and the development status. So that's the knowledge. And next will be on matching. Undersecretary, can you simplify your answers? Do you set any fund to help the business to relocate the factories? Yes or no? Yes. And to set up shop in the zones, a lot of companies will check if there are any tax concessions or other kind of concessions. So we'll ask for the same treatment for the mainland enterprises and those zones in those Belt Road economies. So we want to ensure that the Hong Kong companies will afford the same tax concessions, and also they can make use of the support from the government. Well, the members asking with what concessions will the governments offer to the factories, not the concessions offered by the respective governments. Understand? Well, for the BUD fund, would provide would allow the business to for hiring and to purchase equipment. Now that for the other free trade area, they could have a cap of 2 million. Mr. Chen Chen-ying. President, the RCEP itself is to address the economic integration and globalization. And since the WTO negotiation have been stalled, and also cope with the negative impacts of the globalization of trade, in order to maintain our position and to seek new growth, we do need seek for regional economic integration. Well, however, the RCEP had a lower threshold than FTA, and there was large room for tariffs reduction. And this is really based on bilateral trade ties, and also different from the North American Trans-American Partnership. So Hong Kong as a free port, was there any pros and cons? For the RCEP, like as indicated in my main reply, we want to join the RCEP as a new member economy. As though Mr. Chen claims that this accomplished a bilateral trade pact. Well, for the multilateral pact, for the, let's say, the member states have achieved a consensus on a certain trade terms, and Hong Kong is not part of the RCEP at this stage. But when we talk to the ASEAN, not that we not discuss with individual ASEAN states, however, after ASEAN have formed a consensus in which the Hong Kong will negotiate with them as a whole. As for what bargaining chip or advantages that Hong Kong have, besides the RCEP, we have also signed a lot of free trade agreements. In terms of business environment or financial advantages or some competition advantages, Hong Kong have been subject to a lot of investments. I will not recount them here. I believe that in each FTA would cover goods and services, investment, and technology cooperation. In these three areas, Hong Kong can provide the service provider and the goods provider as the bargaining chip. Mr. Frankie YICK. Undersecretary, I'd like to follow up on Jimmy Ng's question. He asked whether the government have a fund to help the Hong Kong manufacturers to relocate their production base to elsewhere in Asia. Will the government take even further step, just like the Singapore, to set up the Suzhou Industrial Park? Would actually set up a industrial logistical park overseas to help the Hong Kong companies to relocate there? Well, there'll be lots of reasons, tariff being one of them. And now that there's a human shortage, worker shortage, and high wages in the PRC, yes, I led the TDC on a mission to Zhuhai to check out their logistical park. And the Zhuhai government very much welcomed the government to work with us. I'll report this to Secretary Frank Chan later. I wonder if the CEDB would think along those lines to help the Hong Kong manufacturers relocating out of the mainland, or to mainland rather. That's what I want to bring out in my reply to Jim on November 21st at the Mainland and Hong Kong Belt and Road Task Group, which we have discussed it, that for the ETC zones established along the BNR, for the Hong Kong companies, where in terms of supporting facilities and these concessions, which they will ensure they will get the same treatment. As for whether we have a fund, well, for the BOD we have raised the ceiling. For the mainland or other markets, we have quadrupled the ceiling. Whether for hiring or buy equipment, they will actually make use of our BUD fund. I hope those industries could take note of the application process. Martin Liao, I want to follow up one thing. Can you press the button again, Mr. Martin Liao? Since the U.S.-China trade war broke out, more and more Hong Kong manufacturing set up factories in Southeast Asia. Even though the government have been raising the financial ceiling, but in other supporting enterprise measures and expand the coverage and the subsidy for BOD fund targeting Asian countries, and also set up a SME loan guarantee scheme and have a new product to guarantee 90% of the loans. For the SMEs, they're very limited financial and human resource means they can't set up a factory by themselves. When also relocating production based at the time of falling orders is very risky. Well, we should consider extraordinary measures in extraordinary times. My questions relate to Mr. Yick's question. Besides or lobbying the ASEAN countries into providing tax concession to Hong Kong manufacturers, would you consider to sublet the factories inside the industrial parks in South Asia and further sublease them to Hong Kong manufacturers? I'm very willing to discuss it in the Belt and Road Task Group. The first step we've undertaken that for the existing industrial park, in terms of tax concessions, if the Hong Kong business like to set up base, we want to get the same treatment. There's one key point I mentioned in my main reply. To set up work in the ETC, matching of the business and the ETCCs. Through the TDC and other Chamber of Commerce, we want to identify industries that are keen to set up shop in the ETCCs. We will and also match the interested ETCCs. If we can narrow the search, the provisions and the supporting facilities can be more tailor-made, so as to provide a more bespoke support. So we'll keep an open mind and we'll bring it up into the task group. Mr. Frankie YICK. Thank you, Chairman. So the Undersecretary mentioned and for the existing industrial park and logistical park, they will carve out a piece of land for Hong Kong business. Will the government consider directly investing in setting up industrial park or logistic park? And if it's possible, will it be handled by the CEDB? And let me clarify that it's not that I'm carving out a piece of land for Hong Kong. It's just instead that the Hong Kong business to enter these EDCCs, there are terms will be aligned with other mainland companies. But in the past, the Hong Kong business would not be able to enjoy the concession returns by the respective government, and now they will get the same treatment. Mr. Frankie YICK, which part of the question that asks will the government do it or not? And the Secretary? We will continue to discuss it at the task group. We need to have the first step.
The fifth question, Honorable Frankie YICK. It has been reported that a number of public service vehicles, including buses, minibuses, taxis, and school private light buses, have been vandalized or burned during the public meetings and processions held in recent months. Some of the owners and drivers concerned have related that the vandalism of the vehicles as a means of subsistence has gravely affected their livelihood. In this connection, will the government inform this council first of the number of reports of vandalism of public service vehicles received by the police since June this year, with a tabulated breakdown by the class of and extent of damage caused to the vehicles. Second, whether it will consider setting up a fund to subsidize the owners concerned to pay for the expenses on vehicle repair or procurement of new vehicles. If so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that. And third, given that taxis and minibuses are vulnerable to vandalism as most of them are parked at public places such as roadside and public transport interchanges at night, where the government will consider providing additional temporary car parks for the parking of public service vehicles so as to minimize the chance of such vehicles being vandalized. Secretary for Transport and Housing. Thank you, Mr. President. President, currently, 90% of Hong Kong people rely on public transport services to travel, and the number of daily passenger trips is as high as 12 million. Due to the continuous public events in the past 6 months, various road facilities and land transport services have been affected to varying degrees, which have greatly hampered the land public transport services and seriously obstructed the travel of the general public. All relevant government departments, including the Transport Department, TD, and Highways Department, and public transport service operators, have been making their best endeavors to resume the provision of relevant services as soon as possible. I hereby once again urge all people that, regardless of your political stance or views towards the incidents, you should never damage the public transport vehicles and road traffic facilities. We should all treasure Hong Kong and restore calm and stability in society. My reply to the various parts of Honorable Yik Chi-ming's question is as follows. First, according to the police, they classify the reported cases by the case nature so as to keep the relevant cases in their records. Simply speaking, vandalism done to the road traffic facilities are classified as cases of criminal damage. The police does not maintain any statistics breakdown based on the types of damaged object or facility. Therefore, we are not able to provide detailed figures as requested. Nonetheless, according to the information obtained by the TD from the major public transport service operators, it is understood that from June to the end of November 2019, around 420 franchised buses, constituting around 7% of all franchised buses and 7 tram cars, were vandalized to different extents during the public order events in the past few months, including being burnt, smeared, glass windows being broken or vandalized, and tires being deflated, etc. As for public light buses, PLBs, taxis, and non-franchised buses, according to the rough estimates provided by the relevant major service operators to the TD, more than 100 vehicles were vandalized. Second, public transport services in Hong Kong are generally provided by relevant service operators on commercial principles. Maintenance and procurement of vehicles, etc., are under the daily operation scope for which the operators or vehicle owners should be responsible. At present, we have no plan to set up a special fund for vehicle owners affected to repair or procure vehicles. However, we understand that the operating environment of the public transport sector has been greatly affected by the social activities in recent months. In this regard, the Financial Secretary announced a series of measures on the 15th of August and the 22nd of October this year, respectively, aiming to help the transport trades to cope with the pressure brought by the social and economic environment. The measures included the following. Firstly, from the 30th of December 2019 onwards, the vehicle license fees and examination fees for registered commercial vehicles, fees payable for the new issue or renewal of passenger service license (PSL) and PSL certificate for eligible types of vehicles will be waived for 12 months. Secondly, the government will introduce a 6-month fuel subsidy or a one-off subsidy to assist the transport trades. In terms of land transport, the government will offer a $1 discount per liter of liquid petroleum gas (LPG). There is approximately a 1/3 discount for 6 months for LPG taxis and PLBs, and reimburse 1/3 of the actual diesel cost for 6 months for each diesel PLB. The government will also reimburse 1/3 of the actual fuel cost and 1/3 of the actual electricity cost to the 5 franchised bus companies and tramways, respectively, for 6 months. In addition, every licensed non-franchised bus and goods vehicle will receive a one-off non-accountable subsidy of $5,000. The TD is drawing up the specific details of the arrangement. We plan to consult the Legislative Council panel on transport on the implementation details in early 2020 and will seek the funding approval in accordance with the established mechanism. Thirdly, the rental for short-term tenancies for government land for fee-paying public car parks under the Lands Department, as well as the rental for fee-paying public car parks under the Government Property Agency and the Leisure and Cultural Services Department, will be reduced by 50% for 6 months, with retrospective effect from the 1st of October 2019. If the relevant operators would share such concessions with their car park users, this will benefit the transport trades and car owners in general. The government will continue to closely monitor the operating environment of the public transport service sector and will consider introducing further measures to help the whole transport sector if necessary. Thirdly, as regards parking spaces, given the operational characteristics and needs of the major public transport modes, the arrangements for provision of parking spaces for public transport service vehicles differ from those for general commercial vehicles and private cars. For franchised buses at present, their parking spaces are mainly provided at bus depots and bus terminals in various districts to cater for the operational needs of the relevant public transport services and optimize the use of limited land resources. The government also permits franchise buses and PLBs to park at designated public transport interchanges and PLB stands at night. As for taxis, given their mode of operation, they generally operate on the road round the clock and their parking demand is mainly for short duration stay. Hence, all along, the TD has not made specific planning for parking provision for taxis. In fact, if taxi owners or drivers need to park for longer durations, they may choose to park at general parking spaces for private cars. The government multi-story car parks on the TD also provide parking spaces for taxis, and monthly parking tickets are sold to taxi owners or drivers at a concessionary rate. At the same time, there are quite a number of short-term tenancy car parks in various districts of Hong Kong, providing parking spaces for different types of vehicles, including public service vehicles like PLBs and taxis. Given the land resource situation in Hong Kong and the aforementioned policies, the government has no plans at the current juncture to provide additional temporary car parks dedicated for public service vehicles. That said, we'll closely monitor the parking demand of such vehicles. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Frankie YICK. Thank you, Mr. President. As to his answer to the second part of my question, which is the most important part of my question, I resented two parts of the 2 points in the answer. It is said that maintenance and procurement of vehicles are under the daily operation scope for which the operators of vehicle owners should be responsible. Of course, it is part of the normal operation, I won't mind, but then it is a special situation. They are making their ends meet and their means of living is being destroyed. Now you're saying that, sorry, I can't help it. You went on to talk about a large number of mitigatory measures. If I still have my vehicle, of course I am entitled to the measures, but if the vehicle has already been burnt down, then what can I do? Secretary, thank you, Mr. President. I can understand Mr. Frankie YICK's point, and I can understand the sentiments and the anxiety of owners of such commercial vehicles that have been burnt. Earlier on, the Financial Secretary has already made an announcement. Under the SME Guarantee Financing Scheme, we have a 90% coverage so that a maximum $6 million loan can be given out to be repaid in over a long period of time. And at the same time, the banks have got a risk assessment system to deal with such loan applications from vehicle operators. If the trade has got any special concerns, we are listening to their views. And in fact, we would monitor the operation of such public service operators and will take into account the views as well as study them carefully. Mr. YIU Si-wing, for the past few months, we've seen that the number of arriving tourists has come down significantly, 30–40%, and for inbound tour groups, a fall of 70–80%. So for coaches serving such tourists, the operators have had a hard time. The drivers have no jobs, and then the coaches are not hired for service. So they have to be parked at the parking spaces, and that has added to their operation costs. Sometimes they have to park their vehicles in the new territories, and the vehicles are totally unattended. This will jeopardize road safety. It will also cause traffic congestion or traffic obstruction. I wondered if the administration would consider the following. In relation to such tourist coaches and their operators, I think there are still vacant government sites. Can you not put them up for the temporary parking of such coaches? And when things get back to normality, then you take back the sites, and then you can sort of mitigate the difficulties that they're encountering. Secretary, thank you, Mr. President. I thank Mr. Yu for his question. Yes, for tourism, catering, and the retailing industries, yes, they have been hard hit recently. We are fully aware of the difficulties faced by the relevant sectors. We are happy to try to help. Now, for remote areas in the new territories, if you have identified sites and if the trade is interested and if it is feasible, we are more than happy to consider the possibility. So, Mr. Yu, if you have any vacant sites in mind, please liaise with us. Of course, we'll also take the initiative to understand the needs. Let me take this opportunity to say the following. The TD has always been watching the parking demands of our society. We know that it is a very acute problem, and then at night when traffic is light, we can make spaces available. And then for short-term tenancies, again, we have mandate the provision of a certain number of spaces for commercial vehicles. In this way, we can help the trade, but of course, for any short-term arrangements, I think we can only resort to exceptional measures during exceptional circumstances. If you have identified any vacant sites, please tell us. Mr. Houghton Zhao. Mr. President, for 6 months, we have had social turmoil, and the commuting public have been much affected, and their safety has also been jeopardized. Even for the MTR stations, you need to step up the protection so that the stations won't be damaged, affecting the commuting public. Now let me turn back to the question. For public transport service, now it is said that for POBs and taxis that have been damaged, it appears to me that you are not going to compensate for their loss. It means that the owners themselves have to bear the cost of maintenance, etc. Now you're asking them to pick up the bill, but what about insurance? Can they really afford to pay the bill for such an arrangement? They may not. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, different vehicle owners and different operators have taken out insurance policies with different terms and conditions. So I believe that the relevant vehicle owners and operators will take up the matter with their own insurance company to find out whether they can claim any compensation. In future, as to the insurance policies, well, I think the premium will be affected. I think the premium is dependent upon the accident rate of the relevant class of vehicles. That aside, as Mr. Hon Chow and Mr. Frankie YICK have said, individual vehicle owners have had their vehicles damaged and they're facing economic hardship. I'm sure we can talk to the trade to see what can be done. We'll be watching the development. But in any event, businesses, F&B, retailing, tourism, etc. have been affected by the recent social events. And we will look at the actual circumstances and we'll try to talk to the Financial Secretary. If there are further initiatives, we will certainly bear in mind the relevant circumstances and will try to cope with the situation and respond to it. Dr. Lu Wai-kok, Mr. President, for public transport, well, in the past few months, public transport has been affected as a result of the social turmoil. Well, vehicles have been damaged, our trunk roads have been blocked, and in particular, the Cross Harbour Tunnel was blocked, and the consequences was very serious. Therefore, at this meeting, I would like to invite the Secretary to tell us about the extent of the damage done to the Cross Harbour Tunnel. There was a saying that the government deliberately prevented the operation of the CHT. Would you like to clarify this point? And what are you going to do to prevent the facility from being damaged again? Because it does have a serious impact. Dr. Lu Wai-kok, the question you asked is not related to the main question, but still it's up to the Secretary to choose whether to answer or not. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm willing to provide an answer. Well, for the past period, a number of public transport infrastructure like the Cross Harbour Tunnel, the railway system, as well as our traffic lights have been seriously affected and damaged. Let me first of all talk about the preventive measures. The administration, in particular the police, would step up the liaison and will also have more liaison work with the operators. We will protect and prevent the damages. Our past experience was that for the Cross Harbour Tunnel, we spent 100 hours to work on it, and the contractors and government departments worked very hard to restore the operation of the CHT after repairing them. For the Kowloon exit of the CHT, it was under attack, and then as a result of the need to care for the safety of the workers, government departments and contractors were not able to enter that area to carry out any repair work. but then there has been no delay in relation to our efforts. And then for the railway system as well as the traffic lights, I think if you remember, I think in the beginning, when a railway station or a certain track was affected, usually service was restored the following day. The same was true for traffic lights because we're able to get the spare parts from our stores. But having had this for 6 months, we still have 30 sets of traffic lights at major road junctions waiting to be repaired. This is because not just the lights themselves were affected. We have to look at the computer-controlled systems. Well, in fact, we have run out of stock in relation to the spare parts. We need to order the spare parts from overseas, and it would only be end of January next year that we'll get them. But then we're talking about computer-controlled systems, so we need to carry out the computer programming first. So we have to wait for the spare parts to arrive in Hong Kong before we can continue with the repair work. I would appeal to the public to be especially careful if you are crossing a road junction without traffic lights. Please be extra careful. And for road junctions without traffic lights, and motorists approach such junctions, you have to be exceptionally careful. Mr. Frankie YICK. Thank you, Mr. President. When the Secretary answered my question earlier on, he mentioned that the government might provide a 90% coverage in relation to a special loan scheme, and then you can pay the interest first without paying the capital. In fact, it's a scheme under the Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation. But then, in fact, it's for startups. So, Secretary, would you like to study the matter together with the FS and other departments? Yes, we do welcome such a 90% coverage. But then for minibuses that have been burnt down, they need a replacement vehicle, but they haven't got the money. If you can come up with a interest-free loan, it will be of use. But my understanding is that the scheme you referred to doesn't actually cover this scenario. Secretary. Thank you, President. Thank you, Mr. YICK, for your question. Yes, the FS announcement was about an SME loan guarantee scheme. The scope is extensive. For the one mentioned by Mr. YICK, is something under the Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation. It's been there for quite a while, for $300,000 maximum. But then there are two different schemes. They're not the same.
Last question. Seeking an oral reply, Mr. YIU Si-wing. Since the eruption of the disturbances arising from the opposition to the proposed legislative amendments in June this year, the number of visitor arrivals to Hong Kong has plummeted, and the tourism industry has been hard hit by that. Sorry. The Hong Kong Tourism Board has already cancelled the Hong Kong Cyclothon, Hong Kong Wine and Dine Festival, and Chinese New Year Night Parade for the financial year. Regarding the measures to assist the tourism industry in tapping business opportunities, will the government inform this council, 1, whether it knows TB, Tourism Board's original and latest estimates of expenditures on promotional activities for the second half of this year and the first half of next year respectively, with a breakdown by mainland and non-mainland visitor source markets. 2. Given that TB will complement the government's implementation of the travel agents' incentive scheme and waive participation fees of the trade for joining trade fairs and travel missions organized by the TB on the mainland and overseas, whether the government will review the effectiveness of such measures jointly with the TB and consider raising the amount of subsidy and streamlining the application procedure, if so, of the details, if not, the reasons for that, and 3. Given that the Tourism Board has in recent years endeavored to promote in-depth district tourism, including introducing to tourists neighborhoods such as Old Town Central and Sham Shui Po under the theme of Hong Kong neighborhoods, whether it knows if the TB will roll out more in-depth district tourism initiatives and tap local visitor source so as to boost local consumption and drive the recovery of the economy. If the TB will, of the details, if not the reasons for that. Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development. President. Tourism is a key sector of the Hong Kong economy. In 2018, tourism employed about 260,000 persons and accounted for 4.5% of GDP. The industry is one of the sectors hard hit by the continuous social events recently. Visitor arrivals declined significantly since July. Meanwhile, around 40 countries have issued travel advisories on Hong Kong, which has affected Hong Kong's international image and severely hit the tourism and related industries. The government has been closely monitoring the development of the situation and maintaining close communication with the Tourism Board, Travel Industry Council of Hong Kong (TIC) and the tourism sector, etc. In view of the impact of social events on the trade, the government has rolled out several rounds of support measures to alleviate the pressure of the industry. Also, the government will continue to support the board's promotion work in overseas and mainland markets to restore visitors' confidence in visiting Hong Kong. My reply to the question asked by Mr. Yeo is as follows: 1 and 2. According to the board's original work plan, the total marketing budget in 2019-20 was estimated at about 433 million, of which 169 million was planned for use in visitor source markets. Of this, 77% was to be allocated to non-mainland markets and 23% to mainland market. In addition, the government allocated additional funding of 326 million in the 2019-20 budget to the board to strengthen the promotion of Hong Kong. The protests in recent months has seriously damaged Hong Kong's image as a travel destination, resulting in a decline in visitor arrivals. In response to this, the board suspended its large-scale promotion work in the mainland and overseas markets in the second half of the year and cancelled after careful consideration large-scale events including the Hong Kong Dragon Boat Carnival, Hong Kong Cyclothon and the Wine and Dine Festival. According to the board's latest estimate, the total expenditure of this financial year will be about 200 million less than the original estimate. The board has been actively preparing for both short and long-term promotion plans, which will be rolled out gradually at an opportune time and will take the best use of its resources to reallocate the unused funding. These tactical initiatives include rolling out promotion plans gradually in international short-haul source markets, including launching a common platform for businesses from all sectors in the city to promote visitors to come and leverage on the influence of local residents. These programs aim to attract overseas relatives and friends, as well as fans of Hong Kong, to stimulate spending in to generate business for travel agents, hotels, attractions, catering, retail, etc. We will also strengthen promotion and enhance the content of various mega events, such as the International Chinese New Year Carnival, and stepping up overseas promotion of Hong Kong 7 scheduled for April 2020. The board has also rolled out a series of relief and incentive measures, including one from the 1st of October this year to 31st of March next year. The board has waived the participation fees for members of the travel trade to join trade fairs and travel missions organized by the board. And between the 1st of October this year to the 30th of September next year, over 8,000 outlets, that is all merchants accredited under the Quality Tourism Service Scheme, can have their full renewal fees waived for 1 year, and new applicants will enjoy a 50% reduction in application fees. And there is also the launching of the Travel Agents Incentive Scheme, which will provide cash incentives to travel agents. Since the launch of the scheme on the 18th of November, they have organized 4 briefings. And between November and early December, these briefing schemes are to assist application procedures. As at the end of November, they have received about 100 travel agency applications covering about 15,000 travelers. And we will maintain close liaison with the board, with the TIC and travel trade, to closely monitor the implementation of this scheme and consider enhancement measures. In relation to the third part of the question, the board has launched 2 district programs in Central and Sham Shui Po, and they've received positive feedback. But in order to enrich the contents of the Old Town Central and Sham Shui Po promotions, they will leverage the new attractions and new elements
inviting visitors and local to explore the districts. In addition, the Tourism Commission is organizing a pilot scheme integrating various tourism elements, namely the Yim Tien Zai Arts Festival 2019 that was launched on the 30th of November. There will be an open museum showcasing the coexistence of Roman Catholicism and traditional Hakka culture and the spectacular natural landscape. There will be guided tours and activities covering the history, culture, and ecology, as well as religion of the place. We welcome visitors to explore this unique heritage. The board is actively promoting the Arts Festival to visitors through web pages, visitor centers, social media platforms to disseminate relevant information. There will also be media coverage to attract visitors. And during the festival, the board has also set up an exhibition in Sai Kung Waterfront Park for visitors to explore the attractions and natural landscape of Sai Kung. In the future, the board will continue to develop in-depth local tourism. In relation to some strategic locations, they will take into account resources and they will enhance communication before they launch further promotion projects. Mr. Yu. Well, recent disturbances have seriously affected the tourism industry and related industries. There might have been a series of measures, but they're dropped in the ocean. So, after Christmas as well as the Chinese New Year, if the disturbances do not die down, you can't rule the possibility of a wave of closure of businesses. Will you consider further programs? Say, for example, some relief measures. Yesterday, we heard about some consumption vouchers by the Hong Kong Electric as well as the China Light and Power. Will the government consider issuing these consumption or spending vouchers to stimulate businesses for retail as well as related industries? We have heard different views from different parties in different sectors. There has been a number of rounds of relief measures, say, for example, waiving of permits, fees, renewal fees, so that businesses can obtain support that ranges from several hundred to several $1,000s. Perhaps they might be a drop in the ocean, but the most important thing is to bring visitors into Hong Kong. The board will liaise with different sectors, say, for example, catering, retail, hotelier, and aviation. By making available all these special deals, we don't just promote to overseas visitors, but also local residents as well, so that people will come out to spend, so that businesses will benefit. There is the Yim Tien Zai Art Festival as well as the in-depth tourism programs. They will be promoted to overseas visitors and local residents as well. What was the question? What about the direct issuance of consumption vouchers? As we've said, that we will actively consider that. But in previous meetings, in panel meetings, I said that we have to consider whether these measures are targeted, whether they would directly help the sector. But we have heard your views and we will actively consider them. Mr. LUK Chung-hung. Well, there has been violence as well as social unrest caused by this legislative amendments. Well, there has been a drop of visitors by 60%, and inbound visitors, whether they are from mainland or not, have declined. And our image as a hospital city has been hard hit. Hotels, the hotel sector, the retail sector, the catering sectors have all been seriously affected. You need to go to the street to find out what's happened to these people when they've lost their job. The tourism board has cancelled a number of large-scale events. They have saved about $200 million. They have in their place launched some small-scale programs, say, for example, the travel agents incentive schemes. Well, in relation to the $200 million saved, you can use it on other areas. Say, for example, encouraging Hong Kong people to visit different places by, say, for example, giving $200 a day to people. That means 5 million people will benefit from it. What's your question, Mr. Luk? My question was, whether the government will consider these consumption vouchers or travel vouchers to boost a domestic demand, to inject energy into the trade so that frontline practitioners will have a chance to make money, and whether there will be promotional efforts by giving more opportunities to guided tours and visitor centers instead of these patchy band-aid programs. I do agree with Mr. Luk that the continuous social incidents has dealt a heavy blow to the tourism and related industries, frontline practitioners, and employees. Yes, they might have lost their job, or they would have earned a lot less. The direction of our promotion is not just to attract incoming visitors. We do have to restore confidence in this regard as well, but it will take time. I do agree with Mr. Luk. We have to cast our gaze onto the domestic market. We have to find ways to encourage local residents to come out to spend, or to go to different places to spend. We have a benefit platform. It's jointly launched by the Hong Kong Tourism Board as well as other sectors. But if our society can be calm again, these measures will be much more effective. Mr. Tony Tse. Thank you. As you all know that for the past 6 months, because of the social events as well as violence that we have seen, the tourism industry has been hard hit. Practitioners, staff working in hotels, drivers are all affected. In the main reply and in his oral reply, the Secretary has said things that are rather disappointing, because all he said was to actively consider all these ideas, but we want action. You talk about promotional events to try to expand to appeal to the source market. However, you only talk about existing events like Hong Kong Sevens. How do you attract more people to come to Hong Kong? Are there any large-scale events in the pipeline? Can you share the information with us? Thank you. Apart from organizing events, we also attach importance on MICE events. There are some MICE incentive package of the Tourism Board attracting businesses of different sizes to come to Hong Kong as an award scheme. We face a number of challenges. Large-scale exhibitions and fairs, say for example, TDCs has organized about 20 of such events. A lot of work has been devoted into these events to ensure that overseas visitors can come to Hong Kong. Buyers and companies that are here to hold their exhibitions can come to Hong Kong. And according to the information I have, to them it was business as usual like last year. Relevant departments as well as organizations have been doing their best, and they will continue to do so. What hasn't been answered? What are the large-scale events in the pipeline? Anything to add, Secretary? Every month in the past, there has been large-scale events. In the future, for outdoor events, we do our best to try to keep them in place. In relation to promotional efforts in the large in the major economies, we have been doing that. And there has been a number of major events in the past few months. If we can continue to do that, and if society stability is restored, we do think that business will bounce back. There are about $326 million has been allocated to enhance promotion of Hong Kong, and the secretary said that $200 million has been saved as a result of cancellation of a number of large-scale events, and in the end, they are not sure whether they will be able to use up all the budgeted amount. We see that the tourism industry has been hit really hard. Will they continue to increase the resources or increase more on top of the $326 million so that the tourism board will have more resources to promote Hong Kong in order to save our tourism industry? I agree with what the member said. The $200 million not used will be used in further promotional efforts, and if there are any initiatives that would help restore the life to the tourism industries, we will actively consider them. Mr. Lui Kwok, a number of members have asked the administration to issue consumption vouchers to stimulate spending. I'm not going to go into that. It's very important for visitors in the decision to choose Hong Kong as a destination is whether Hong Kong is safe. What promotional programs do they have in mind to save the tourism industry in Hong Kong that is hanging on a thread? We will explain to overseas economies. ASEAN economies actually has a very positive view on Hong Kong. So our strategy is to enhance our promotion and publicity in the ASEAN markets. The meeting is adjourned. It is to be continued at 2:30.